Hey everybody. I'm sure most of you never really give much thought to the way I describe video game genres. Whenever I make a video, whether it's my thoughts on video, a review, a games that infuriate me to no end, whatever the case may be, at some point I'm going to mention the genre of the game that's being covered. Whether that's first-person shooter, role-playing game, adventure game, what have you. And whenever I do this, I try to be as specific as I can, and I try to use as appropriate a term as I can for that particular genre. For example, when I describe a game like Deus Ex, I say it is a first-person shooter and role-playing game hybrid. When I describe a game like Dishonored, it's a stealth action game. If I describe a game like Thief, it is a stealth game, not a stealth action game, a stealth game. Some of you may have already picked up on where I'm going with this, but for those of you who are still in the dark, all of these games I'm describing are lumped together in the category referred to as Immersive Sims. This is a term that, from what little looking I have done, seems to have originated with Warren Spector when he did a post-mortem on Deus Ex, but it didn't really start getting widely used until around 2016 or so. And it's been a thorn in my side ever since. It gets thrown around constantly whenever people start talking about the Thief games, Deus Ex, Arcane Studios releases, so on and so forth. And it is simultaneously one of the dumbest and most pretentious terms that has tried to enter the common gaming vernacular. I say tried because, let's face it, nobody actually knows what you're talking about when you say immersive sim. I mean, ordinarily, when you have a genre name that is wildly inaccurate, like, say, JRPG, or describing a Diablo clone as an ARPG, at least you can kinda see where they're coming from on some element of it. With immersive sim, it's just a complete nonsense buzzword. I mean, think about it. Just break down the term itself. Immersive sim. Well, literally any game in existence can be immersive. Doesn't matter what it is. If it's done properly, it can be immersive. Okay, fine. Sim. Simulation. Well, the games being described as immersive sims are definitely not simulation games, not by any stretch of the imagination. You think of a simulation game, you think of something like flight simulation games, or other vehicle simulation games, or job simulation games, or if you extrapolate a bit, more war simulation games like Arma or Operation Flashpoint or things like that. And with all of these complex simulation games you immediately think of, you also think, well, yeah, those are going to be immersive too, because that's the entire point of a simulation game. And then to make matters worse, you look at the term immersive sim, and then you look at the games that it is being used to describe, and you find that they are wildly disparate experiences from one another. I mean, think about it. They are saying that Deus Ex, which is a first-person shooter role-playing game hybrid, Thief, which is a straight-up stealth game, Dishonored, which is a stealth action game, Prey 2017, which is a first-person shooter, Deathloop, which is a time loop roguelite first-person shooter, and Ultima Underworld, which is an RPG dungeon crawler, are all in the same genre, when the simple fact of the matter is that no, they're not in the same genre, because the so-called immersive sim genre is not actually a genre. It's just a buzzword that keeps getting thrown around to describe games that have a high degree of mechanical reactivity built into their worlds. And while it's perfectly fine to try to find a term to describe a high degree of mechanical reactivity in a world, that's not actually a genre, it's just a design element. You see, a genre name needs to be descriptive of what the actual experience of playing the game is going to be like. When you say first-person shooter, you know the game takes place from a first-person perspective, and you will be running around shooting at enemies with some form of ranged weapon, whether it's a firearm, or a crossbow, or spells, or whatever the case may be. When you say stealth game, you know that the gameplay experience is going to be centered around moving around quietly and avoiding detection. When you say stealth action game, you know that the experience is going to be a two-way split between sneaking around and action-oriented gameplay, usually combat. But the term immersive sim is just so completely non-specific that it's effectively worthless as a descriptor. And between the term being basically useless as a descriptor and it really coming across as a concerted effort by gaming journalists to try to inject a pseudo-intellectual term into common gaming vernacular just means that I have not only no interest in using the term immersive sim, but I actively reject its use. I will not call a game an immersive sim, because it's a terrible way of describing one, and I highly recommend that you don't use the term immersive sim either. Just call those games by what they are. Again, stuff like Deus Ex or System Shock is a first-person shooter RPG hybrid. Stuff like Thief is a stealth game. Stuff like Dishonored is a stealth action game, so on and so forth. You'll find that by doing that, you get a much better idea of what the game is actually like, rather than just saying, well, it's an immersive sim, and then having to quantify your statement by saying, well, it's like Deus Ex, or it's like Thief, or so on and so forth, and then having to clarify that even further. And that about covers everything I have to say about the term immersive sim. This certainly won't be the last time I cover gaming terminology on the channel and do rants about that kind of thing. I mean, for example, I have plans to do another video about how horrendously the term RPG gets misused, so stay tuned for that rant whenever I end up being able to record it. But in the meantime, I hope you enjoyed this rant, or at least found it informative, and thank you all very much for watching. If you like my channel, please consider supporting it on Patreon. If you can't afford to or don't want to, that's perfectly fine, I understand, but the option's there if you're interested, and every bit does help out. Thanks again for watching, and I will see you all in later videos.